Revealing insights from Kyle Busch's death certificate. That report, first obtained by Us Weekly, painting a dramatic picture of the final days of his life, beginning with pneumonia, progressing to sepsis, leading to severe blood loss and shock.
He was NASCAR's most invincible racer. But behind closed doors, Kyle Busch was fighting a silent, biological battler, one he didn't see coming. While fans cheered his legendary triumphs, a series of overlooked medical warning signs revealed a staggering truth. The unbreakable driver was redlining on a fatal countdown. Was this tragic end a cruel twist of poetic timing? Or was his own warrior mentality masking an enemy he couldn't outrun until he was forced to face the shocking reality of his final hours? Kyle Busch's final lap. In a 911 dispatch call from May 20th, 2026, the voice on the other end is breathless, desperately describing a man suffocating on a cold bathroom floor at the high-tech GM Tech Center, gasping for air as his vitals collapse. That man was Kyle "Rowdy" Busch, the ultimate bulletproof racing titan who survived thousands of mechanical dangers and brutal high-speed wrecks, only to be taken down by an invisible enemy inside his own body. But how did this seemingly invincible two-time Cup champion go from commanding a multi-million-dollar racing machine to fighting for his very last breath on a cold bathroom floor just days later? In this video, we are pulling back the curtain to uncover the medical timeline that the racing community tried to process entirely too late. His sudden passing stands as a deeply heartbreaking medical tragedy, but it also represents a cruel, deeply ironic twist of poetic timing. Before the final tragedy struck, an underlying secret about his health was completely ignored by the entire garage area, and death claimed him precisely when the motorsports world had finally laid down its decades of intense hate to give the matured champion his true, well-deserved flowers. Who would have thought that NASCAR's most feared villain would meet an enemy he simply couldn't outrun? From aggressive on-track wrecks and fiery explosions to physical pit road fights, he truly was a legend of unbreakable status. But to understand how this dark shadow fully enveloped the champion, we must look at where it all first started. But before he was a titan fighting for breath, he was a brash kid from Nevada rewriting the entire NASCAR record book, constructing an empire of speed that completely polarized the motorsports world. Early career. To understand the scale of what was about to look like a fatal countdown, you have to understand the legacy Kyle Busch carried into the 2026 season. He was a driver who didn't just win, he dominated to a point that genuinely frustrated the entire industry. From his early days breaking out as a hot-headed, aggressive teenager, entering the Cup Series with Hendrick Motorsports, it was clear he operated on a completely different psychological wavelength than his peers. When a high-profile, bitter fallout led to his dramatic departure from Hendrick, he didn't back down. Instead, he moved to Joe Gibbs Racing and unleashed absolute terror on the track. He didn't just restrict his weaponized talent to Sundays. Kyle routinely dropped down into the Xfinity and Craftsman Truck Series, treating those divisions like his own personal playground and racking up a mind-boggling, historic mountain of trophies. He built a towering monument of 234 overall National Series victories, a number so massive it felt completely unachievable in the modern era of tightly regulated racing. He became the ultimate anti-hero of the sport, the man the sport loved to hate, the driver who actively fed on the boos of 70,000 people in the grandstands. Yet, underneath the cocky theater and the mocking bows, he had an unbelievable, unbroken 19-season winning streak. He had gone from a chaotic disruptor into a revered driver who possessed an unparalleled understanding of the sport. But all empires eventually face an unseen enemy, and for Kyle Busch, the first cracks in the armor began to show at a track that demands absolute physical perfection from a driver's upper body. The Watkins Glen incident. It all began at Watkins Glen International on May 10th. Imagine the physical strain and stress that come with road course racing, the violent G-forces slamming against a driver's body through every sharp elevation change and demanding turn. But underneath the heavy helmet, deep within the cockpit, Kyle Busch was silently battling a hidden, internal war. He brushed it off as a regular, annoying sinus cold, just another minor inconvenience to ignore. Yet, the moment he crossed the checkered flag in a hard-fought 8th place, he didn't celebrate. Instead, he immediately keyed his live team radio, his voice strained and heavy, to demand an urgent medical shot from Team Dr. Bill Heisel. "Hey, tell Doc Heisel I need that shot ready. My chest is burning, man. Just get it ready." This post-race request was actually the terrifying first warning sign of a hidden respiratory infection setting a fatal trap. While fans up in the stands were loudly celebrating an amazing top 10 finish, Busch's immune system was already starting to give way under the intense physical stress of the racing. An invisible countdown had begun, but nobody in the garage area noticed. But to understand why he kept going until he couldn't anymore, we have to look directly at the dangerous psychology of this incredible racetrack icon. To truly understand why Kyle Busch dismissed the burning in his chest, you have to understand why he had an alias called Rowdy. You see, Kyle didn't just have the regular grit and toughness of a professional athlete. He had a legendary, almost pathological, invincibility complex. That stubborn, borderline fanatical defiance didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was systematically forged on the brutal desert short tracks of Las Vegas, Nevada. Growing up under the blazing western sun, Kyle and his older brother Kurt were pushed into the high-stakes crucible of racing at an incredibly young age by a father who demanded nothing short of absolute perfection. In that environment, pain was never seen as a reason to slow down. It was just a distraction to be ignored. By the time Kyle broke into the top tiers of NASCAR, his mind had been permanently hardwired to believe that sheer willpower could overcome any physical limitation. This dangerous psychological conditioning is exactly what made him a medical anomaly during that legendary 2015 comeback, a moment that completely redefined his legacy. When his car violently slammed into an uninsulated concrete wall at Daytona at a brutal angle, the impact was so catastrophic that it instantly shattered his right leg and fractured his left foot. The mainstream sports media universally declared his season dead, with many openly questioning if he would ever walk with a normal stride again, let alone handle the crushing brake pressures required to pilot a 4,300-pound stock car. Yet, behind closed doors, Busch engaged in an agonizing physical therapy regimen that stunned his doctors, and in an unyielding display of resilience, he returned to the track months ahead of schedule with a titanium rod freshly inserted into his leg, defied everything the doctors and experts said, and dominated the Cup Series championship. Not only did he handle the agonizing physical pain of racing with those healing injuries, but he went on an absolute tear, winning 4 races in 5 weeks, and ultimately capturing his very first Cup Series championship in one of the most miraculous athletic recoveries in modern sports history. That specific milestone permanently altered Kyle's relationship with his own body. It cemented an almost pathological belief in his mind that he was unbreakable. In his view, if a shattered skeleton couldn't stop him from dominating the highest level of motorsports, then a basic respiratory ailment didn't stand a chance. It was this exact, deeply flawed state of mind that caused him to completely ignore his rapidly worsening symptoms on that fateful May afternoon. Where a normal person would have recognized the warning signs of a system in distress, Kyle only saw a minor inconvenience that he could easily walk off. He honestly believed his body was simply too tough to get sick. It was this exact state of mind that made him see a deep, disturbing chest cough as nothing more than a minor inconvenience. But it was this invincible warrior mentality that blinded everyone to the silent killer lurking and waiting inside his chest. When your entire brand is built on being the toughest person on the track, how do you admit that a simple cough is causing actual problems for you? You don't. You man up and floor the gas pedal harder. So instead of getting treatment, he packed his gear and headed straight to the next arena, ready to put on a show for the fans. And that he did on the Dover Motor Speedway. 69-time champion. It was May 15th, and Kyle Busch stepped down into the Craftsman Truck Series to pilot the number 7 machine for Spire Motorsports. On the brutal, concrete high banks of the Monster Mile, he put on an absolutely insane race, completely dominating the race from the drop of the flag, staying in the lead for an amazing 147 out of 200 laps. By the end of the race, he had claimed a historic, record-extending 69th career victory in the series, cementing his status as a legend on the racetrack. But underneath the celebration, confetti, and lifting the trophy, his body was quietly falling apart. Nobody celebrating in the winner's circle had any idea that this would officially be the final time Kyle Busch would ever stand in a NASCAR victory lane. Riding high on this triumph, he climbed out of the truck to address the media. But the celebratory atmosphere was about to be pierced by a deeply unsettling moment in the post-race interview, where he made an unintentional prophecy that still sends chills down the spines of racing fans today. As the Fox Sports reporter stepped forward and thrust the microphone toward Kyle Busch, something felt slightly off. He was uncharacteristically breathless, his shoulders heaving as he struggled for oxygen. He looked directly into the lens with a confident smirk and casually remarked, "You never know when the last one is." Those chilling words would come back to haunt the entire NASCAR community just 6 days later. To understand the immense psychological weight riding on this specific stretch of the season, you have to look at the massive gamble he took when he made the landscape-shifting decision to leave Joe Gibbs Racing. For 15 years, Busch had been the undisputed in Joe Gibbs Racing, capturing 2 championships and delivering the vast majority of their hardware. But when a sudden, highly publicized sponsor departure created an ideological rift, the racing world watched in shock as Kyle left. Instead of retreating to a comfortable, safe operation, Kyle chose to jump straight into the iconic number 8 Chevrolet for Richard Childress Racing, a legendary team steeped in the tough legacy of Dale Earnhardt Sr. This move was a risky mission to prove to his detractors, his former team, and himself that his talent and wins weren't a product of elite equipment. He wanted to show the world that he could take an organization on his back and carry them through his driving ability alone. Every single weekend was a test of his reputation, and by the time the 2026 season hit, Kyle was pushing himself harder than ever to solidify Richard Childress Racing's position at the top. When he climbed out of that Spire Motorsports truck at Dover, holding his 69th career truck trophy, he did so out of an obligation to deliver results for Richard Childress, to justify the faith placed in him, and to keep his team motivated for the summer season ahead. In his mind, stepping out of the car or admitting to his crew that he wasn't feeling okay physically simply wasn't an option. He had an image to maintain, a point to prove, and a legacy to protect. Riding high on this triumph, he left the track to prepare for his midweek media obligations, completely unaware that his window of survival was shrinking by the hour. But the whispers of his looming collapse weren't confined to the racetrack. They were about to be captured on tape by an unsuspecting journalist. Fast forward to the day after the Dover victory. The adrenaline of winning the race was gone, leaving behind a heavily fatigued athlete trying to fulfill his rigorous corporate duties. Busch sat down for a routine midweek media check-in with The Athletic. But as the digital recorder rolled, it captured something deeply alarming. Throughout the entire audio recording, a deep, rattling, and persistent chest cough was completely audible, repeatedly interrupting his answers about setup adjustments and track conditions. When the journalist gently pointed out his obvious illness and asked if he was okay to race, Busch merely laughed it off carelessly. To the public, it was just a common case of the flu. But in reality, the routine cold had officially evolved into aggressive, bilateral pneumonia that was actively starving his blood of oxygen and causing his lung tissue to suffer rapid inflammation, setting the stage for a catastrophic system failure. Yet, driven by his unyielding commitment to his team and his fans, he refused to seek medical attention. Instead, he prepared to climb back into the cockpit for one last race in the high-stakes, high-speed oval of Charlotte Motor Speedway, where his legendary career was about to reach its final chapter. It was May 17th, the night of the high-stakes, non-points NASCAR All-Star race. Underneath the blinding stadium lights, a restless crowd filled the grandstands, expecting the usual aggressive, edge-of-your-seat performance from the driver of the number 8 machine. Kyle Busch climbed into his black and gold Richard Childress Racing Chevrolet Camaro, but inside the suffocating heat of the cockpit, he was secretly drowning. His focus was fractured, his vision blurred, and his legendary stamina was rapidly giving way as his body burned through its final energy reserves to fight the raging internal infection. When the checkered flag finally waved, he crossed the finish line in a quiet, uncharacteristic 17th place. Nobody in that packed stadium realized they were looking at the final lap of Kyle Busch's professional career. As he walked out of Charlotte Motor Speedway that night, the garage area was already reflecting deeply on his impact on the sport. Longtime peers and icons like Dale Earnhardt Jr. had recently been opening up about Kyle's singular place in motorsports history, noting that while his aggressive approach had spent decades polarizing millions of fans, it had ultimately earned him reverence from everyone who ever raced against him. Earnhardt Jr. highlighted that Busch was one of the very few drivers who never manufactured a corporate persona. He was always himself, a rare trait that modern racing desperately needed and would deeply miss. Yet, as the media and his fellow competitors openly marveled at his career, Kyle himself was completely detached from the noise. The moment he unstrapped from the suffocating, draining cockpit of the number 8 machine, his focus instantly shifted away from the high-pressure world of professional racing. He was eager to completely shed the exhausting, rowdy persona and escape the mounting physical exhaustion that was quietly clawing at his chest. He needed to step into a space where lap times or trophy counts didn't matter. The last Instagram message. On May 19th, Busch traveled with his inner circle to Mario Andretti's indoor karting and games facility tucked away in Durham, North Carolina, for his son Brexton's 11th birthday. Onlookers at the venue later described a scene that felt worlds away from the racetrack. Busch was smiling brightly, laughing effortlessly, and playfully racing electric go-karts at a modest, gentle 11 miles per hour right alongside his boy. In those precious hours, he completely stepped out of his racetrack persona, rowdy, and turned into a normal, happy dad. He wasn't the polarizing villain of the sport here. He was a doting mentor passing down a love for speed to the next generation, completely unaware that his own heart was beating through its final days of relative calm. Sadly, the warmth of that birthday cake and laughter would quickly give way to a haunting stillness as the night drew to a close. This beautiful, serene family gathering would mark the final peaceful moments of his life before the medical storm caught up to him. Late that evening, as the excitement of the birthday party faded into the quiet of the night, Kyle Busch opened his phone and composed what would become his final public communication to the world. It was a deeply emotional Instagram post dedicated entirely to his son Brexton. Accompanied by photos of their day together, his words overflowed with immense pride as a father. He didn't focus on trophies or racetracks. Instead, he poured his heart into celebrating his son's character and growth, ending the caption with a powerful message: "Keep doing what you're doing, and there is no limit to what you'll accomplish." It read less like a standard birthday post and more like a final permanent passing of the torch from a father who was running out of time. Kyle had no idea this would be his final goodbye to his fans and his son. Yet the text carries the crushing weight of a man cementing his legacy. He went to sleep that night as a proud father, but the morning light would bring him back to his relentless professional obligations. On the afternoon of May 20th at exactly 5:30 p.m., inside the state-of-the-art General Motors Technical Center located in Concord, North Carolina, Kyle Busch was strapped into the rig, executing intense, full-motion simulation runs to prepare for the upcoming, grueling 600-mile race. Now, these advanced, multi-million-dollar engineering simulators are absolutely not video games. They are hyper-realistic, violent machines engineered to perfectly replicate true cockpit heat, intense, crushing G-forces, and real, extreme cardiovascular strain on an athlete's body. As Busch pushed the virtual race car to its absolute limit, his infection-racked body was quietly experiencing a catastrophic, full-scale physiological failure. The immense internal heat and physical strain forced his compromised respiratory system into an irreversible collapse. This legendary icon spent 20 years defying death at 200 miles per hour on the world's most dangerous concrete ovals. Yet his final, fatal struggle took place inside a sterile, quiet, and high-tech corporate engineering facility rather than a real racetrack. Stranded in the dim light of the simulation bay, his lungs completely filled with fluid, gasping for air, the champion unstrapped himself and collapsed heavily onto the floor, completely out of breath. The high-tech silence of the laboratory was about to be broken by a desperate cry for emergency help. A panicked team member opened the door and discovered Kyle Busch collapsed helplessly on the floor. The urgent 911 call made directly to the Cabarrus County Sheriff's Office reveals a situation spiraling rapidly out of control. The caller frantically described a man experiencing overwhelming shortness of breath, a dangerously high body temperature, and actively coughing up blood as his system violently struggled to keep him alive. The sirens were getting louder and closer, but the battle to stabilize the champion was only becoming more difficult by the second. As the emergency lights cut through the North Carolina evening, the race had gone from the digital track of the simulation to the back of a speeding ambulance. Inside the cramped, swaying vehicle, the atmosphere was thick with tension as emergency medical technicians scrambled to stabilize Kyle Busch. They watched in horror as his vitals began to violently fluctuate, his heart rate entering dangerous territory while his oxygen levels plummeted. The EMTs worked tirelessly, administering high-flow oxygen and prepping intravenous lines, but the infection inside Kyle's chest was moving faster. Mid-transit, the frantic struggle reached a terrifying tipping point. Kyle Busch's eyelids closed, his responses entirely ceased, and he slipped into a coma. As the ambulance doors swung open at the emergency bay, the medical team realized they were fighting an uphill battle against systemic shutdown. The man who had spent his entire existence dictating his own fate at breakneck speeds was now completely powerless, leaving a team of frantic doctors to try and pull off a medical miracle. As the night wore on, a suffocating silence blanketed the hospital corridors, a silence that was about to breach the walls of the racing garage. The following morning, on May 21st, at 10:23 a.m., a media statement was suddenly sent out to the unsuspecting racing press corps. It announced with startling brevity that Kyle Busch had experienced a severe illness resulting in sudden hospitalization and would officially vacate his seat for the Charlotte race weekend. While the public believed he was simply resting up for a future race, behind closed hospital doors, the situation was completely fatal. Fans and other racers waited in dread for news on the icon. The normal media chatter vanished, replaced by an agonizing silence as everyone realized this wasn't just some simple sports injury. But while the internet was desperately searching for answers, the physical reality of his absence was already affecting his race team. And in a quiet corner of the Charlotte garage, his physical machine was waiting for a driver who would never arrive because he was currently fighting his final, silent battle miles away. A suffocating atmosphere filled the garage as the mechanics stood around the car in stunned, paralyzed silence, tightly clutching their wrenches as they received the devastating internal update directly from the hospital. The heavy silence of the garage stall was about to be matched by a collective gasp from millions of fans across the globe. At 5:40 p.m. on May 21, 2026, A joint official statement was released simultaneously by the Busch family, NASCAR, and Richard Childress Racing, officially announcing that Kyle Busch had passed away at 41. The devastating news instantly triggered a massive wave of grief across global sports networks, stopping anchors in their tracks and bringing studio broadcasts to a grinding halt. Decades of fierce on-track rivalries, intense sports debates, and passionate fan animosity vanished in an instant, replaced by a profound collective sorrow. The vibrant, colorful world of motorsports suddenly experiences a massive, dramatic shift, draining away every ounce of brightness and plunging the entire landscape into mourning. The boos that had followed him for thousands of miles were permanently silenced, replaced by a deafening universal realization that one of the absolute greatest to ever get behind a steering wheel was gone. The finality of his departure wasn't just felt in the shattered hearts of millions of race fans worldwide, it was instantly reflected in the cold, unyielding mechanics of the sport's official record books. Within hours of the devastating announcement, NASCAR took the unprecedented and deeply somber step of officially removing Kyle Busch's name from the active 2026 championship points standings. This chilling bureaucratic finality brought an immediate, sobering weight with it. The active 2026 season was moving forward out of sheer necessity, but the erasure of the number 8 car from the championship hunt proved that the garage was operating in an entirely new, deeply uncomfortable era. Simultaneously, the sports world was forced to deal with how to properly honor a legacy that had been cut down so abruptly in its prime. Hall of Fame consideration. Industry officials and historians immediately shifted their focus toward the future, with conversations rapidly accelerating regarding his locked-in first-ballot eligibility for the NASCAR Hall of Fame class of 2027. The traditional rules and waiting periods felt entirely irrelevant in the face of such an unprecedented tragedy. There was an unspoken agreement across the entire motorsports landscape that his historic 234 National Series victories demanded immediate immortal status. But while the officials were busy with paperwork and the media, the public was still trapped in a state of sheer, unadulterated shock. People simply could not rationalize how an athlete of his caliber could simply vanish from the earth in a matter of 48 hours. As the shock settled into a painful reality, the public desperately demanded answers, trying to make sense of how a man who seemed invincible and indomitable could be gone so easily. And in that search for answers, the wild internet myths began to pop up. In the vacuum left by his sudden passing, the internet did what the internet always does. It spun completely out of control. Internet rumors and viral conspiracy videos immediately began flooding social media platforms. Armchair experts and frantic forums falsely claimed that the champion had hidden a severe, long-term heart condition, or that a sudden bout of double pneumonia had taken him out instantly. But the wild speculation doesn't hold up under the light of objective science. In the verified medical report delivered by the official evaluation on May 23rd, the final autopsy report revealed that while he did suffer from pneumonia, that wasn't what killed him. The respiratory infection hadn't just remained in his lungs, it had triggered rapid, systemic sepsis. The severity of this condition caused his immune system to release an overwhelming flood of chemicals directly into his bloodstream, inducing rapid, total organ failure, destroying his body from within. With the clinical facts finally laid bare, the racing community could finally stop asking how it happened and begin the painful process of saying goodbye. And his peers were forced to face a reality they never envisioned. Tributes immediately began flooding in from his fiercest enemies and closest peers. The news was so stunning that it prompted longtime rival Denny Hamlin to release a reaction that echoed the thoughts of millions, stating, "I absolutely cannot comprehend this news." Soon after, legendary champion Jimmy Johnson and the wider sports landscape released profound statements, universally recognizing him not just as a champion, but as a foundational pillar of modern racing history whose absence changed the sport forever. And as the initial feeling of grief began to pass, the racing world had to figure out how to move forward without its central antagonist and anti-hero. Kyle Busch's career was almost mythical with all of his achievements. We are talking about an unmatched 234 overall National Series victories, 2 historic Cup Series championships, and a jaw-dropping, unbroken 19-season winning streak. He had evolved from the deeply hated, sarcastic bad boy who famously bowed mockingly to entire stadiums of booing fans into a revered, mature statesman of the sport who left this world with the absolute respect of the entire globe. Now, I want to turn it over to you. Please take a moment to share your absolute favorite memories of watching Rowdy dominate the racetracks of the world in the comments section below. Let's keep his memory alive. If you want to celebrate more legends who pushed the limits, click the video on your screen right now. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And thank you for watching.